What we imagine about medieval battles is mostly wrong. Paintings show clean armor, heroic charges, clear lines, and noble deaths. Stories speak of honor, banners, and decisive moments. But the reality of medieval battle was not glorious. It was chaotic, suffocating, and terrifying beyond anything most modern people can imagine. A medieval battle did not begin with courage. It began with fear. Before the first blow was struck, the battlefield was already hostile. Mud sucked at boots. Rain soaked clothing. Smoke from torches and burning villages hung low in the air. The ground was uneven, littered with rocks, roots, and the remains of earlier fighting. Soldiers did not stand on clean fields. They stood in filth. Most fighters were not professional warriors. The majority were peasants, Levites, or townsmen forced into service. They trained little, if at all. They carried whatever weapons were available: spears, axes, clubs, farm tools adapted for killing. Armor was rare. Helmets were inconsistent. Many entered battle knowing they were poorly protected. They marched because refusal meant punishment. They fought because retreat meant death. As armies approached each other, tension crushed the senses. Drums beat, horns sounded, shouting echoed without clarity. Orders were hard to hear and easy to misunderstand. Commanders had limited control once fighting began. There were no radios, no clear lines of sight, no reliable way to stop what was about to happen. When contact was made, it was not elegant. Infantry did not clash in clean formations for long. Lines broke almost immediately. Men tripped, shoved, panicked. Shields collided. Spears snapped. The noise was overwhelming, metal on metal, screaming, horses shrieking, men choking on blood and mud. Visibility vanished. Dust, smoke, and bodies reduced vision to a few feet. You did not see the battle. You experienced fragments of it. A face in front of you, a weapon swinging from the side, a body falling underfoot. Confusion was constant, and fear dominated everything. The first real shock came not from wounds but from sound and proximity. Being pressed against other bodies, feeling impacts through shields, hearing bones crack inches away. The realization that death was not distant but immediate. Most medieval wounds were not clean cuts. They were crushing injuries. Broken arms, shattered legs, teeth smashed by shields, fingers severed. Armor did not make soldiers invincible. It trapped heat, limited movement, and became deadly weight when men fell. Once on the ground, survival chances collapsed. Fallen soldiers were trampled, stepped on, crushed under boots and hooves. Trying to rise was nearly impossible. A man on the ground became an obstacle, not a priority. Many died without a final blow, simply suffocated beneath bodies. Cavalry did not charge endlessly as legends suggest. Horses are fragile. They fear noise, blood, and chaos. Cavalry charges were brief, violent, and risky. When they succeeded, they shattered formations. When they failed, they disintegrated into panic. A fallen horse crushed its rider. A wounded one bolted blindly. Battles were not controlled. They were unstable. No one knew who was winning for most of the fight. Messages could not travel. Flags were lost in smoke. Commanders guessed. Decisions were made on fragments of information. Entire units fought long after the battle had already turned against them. Death came in waves. Initial clashes killed some, but most casualties happened afterward, when formations collapsed. Retreat turned into slaughter. Men dropped weapons to run. Running marked you as prey. Pursuit was merciless. A fleeing soldier was vulnerable. Armor slowed him. Panic guided him into obstacles. Those caught were cut down from behind, stabbed while exhausted, killed without resistance. This phase of battle was the most lethal. There were no rules protecting the defeated. Mercy was rare and situational. Killing a fleeing enemy was safer than capturing him. A living prisoner required control. A dead man did not. Blood covered everything. Weapons slipped in hands. Armor filled with sweat and gore. The smell of iron, waste, and smoke overwhelmed the senses. Men vomited from stress and exhaustion. Some froze completely, unable to move. struck dumb by terror. There was no hero's perspective. You did not see the battle unfold. You saw chaos at arm's length. Survival depended on instinct, not strategy, on luck, not skill, and above all, on endurance. A medieval battle could last minutes or hours, but it felt endless. Fatigue crippled fighters faster than wounds. Arms grew heavy. Breathing burned. Vision narrowed. Mistakes multiplied. This is where battles were truly decided, not by perfect tactics, but by which side broke first. Because once fear overcame cohesion, everything collapsed. And when it collapsed, the battlefield revealed its true nature, not as a place of honor, but as a machine that consumed human beings indiscriminately. And this was only the beginning. Because what happened during the height of battle was horrific, but what happened after was often worse. As the battle reached its peak, control dissolved completely. Medieval combat had no pause, no reset, no safe distance. Once formations broke, the battlefield became a shifting mass of individuals fighting for survival. Men no longer knew who stood beside them. Allies and enemies blurred together in smoke, mud, and noise. This was where most died. Close combat was intimate and relentless. Fighters were packed tightly, leaving no room to swing freely. Weapons struck at awkward angles. Blades glanced off armor, bit into exposed joints, or crushed bone through padding. Killing was rarely instant. Men screamed, begged, cursed, and bled while still standing. Pain did not stop the fight. Fear did. The human body could endure wounds far longer than the mind could endure terror. Once panic spread, discipline vanished. A single man turning to run could trigger collapse. Others followed instinctively. What moments earlier had been a force became a crowd. Retreat was the most dangerous phase of battle. Running required space, and space did not exist. Armor dragged bodies down. Shields were thrown aside. Helmets ripped off to breathe. Soldiers tripped over corpses and uneven ground. Those who fell were finished quickly, often without being recognized as individuals. Pursuit was brutal and efficient. Victors did not chase out of rage alone. They chased because it was the safest way to kill. A fleeing enemy could not fight back. Strikes came from behind. Throats were cut. Spines pierced. Mercy slowed momentum and exposed attackers to danger. This was not chaos. It was instinct refined by experience. Many medieval armies expected higher casualties during pursuit than during the initial clash. This was understood. Commanders encouraged it. The goal was not just to win, but to destroy the enemy's ability to regroup. The battlefield became a killing ground. Wounded men tried to crawl away. Some hid among the dead, holding their breath as boots passed inches from their faces. Others lay still, pretending to be corpses while blood soaked into the earth. Some survived this way. Many did not. Once resistance ended, the nature of violence changed again. Looting began immediately. Armor, weapons, boots, belts, anything valuable was stripped from bodies, living or dead. The wounded were searched first. A man still breathing could still be robbed. If he resisted, he was killed. There was no clear line between battle and aftermath. Killing continued long after organized fighting stopped. Small groups hunted stragglers. Villages near the battlefield were raided. Fires spread. Civilians were caught in the spillover of victory. The land suffered with the people. Fields were trampled. Livestock slaughtered or stolen. Water sources fouled by corpses. The battlefield poisoned the region for months, sometimes years. Disease followed armies like a shadow. This is where myths collapse completely. Medieval battles were not clean endings to conflicts. They were beginnings of suffering that extended far beyond the field. Victory destabilized entire regions. Defeat destroyed communities. And then came the prisoners. Capture did not happen during the chaos. It happened after. Men were taken when they could no longer resist. When exhaustion overcame fear. When weapons were dropped. When survival seemed possible through surrender. Those moments were fragile. A raised hand did not guarantee life. A kneeling man could still be killed if emotions ran hot or control was lost. Prisoners existed only when violence slowed enough to allow it. Those taken alive were gathered roughly, bound quickly, stripped partially to prevent escape. Guards did not yet know what would be done with them. That decision came later. For now, they waited. The battlefield after combat was a place of unbearable contradiction. Silence followed noise. Stillness followed chaos. The air filled with flies. Smoke drifted over broken bodies. Survivors moved among the dead, stepping carefully, checking for valuables, finishing those still alive. There was no ceremony. Mass graves were dug if time allowed. More often, bodies were left where they fell. Wolves, birds, and weather completed the work. Memory faded faster than flesh. For those who had survived the fighting, shock set in. Hands shook uncontrollably. Vision blurred. Some men laughed hysterically. Others sat in silence, staring at nothing. Medieval society had no understanding of psychological trauma, but it lived with its effects constantly. These men would carry the battle with them, and for prisoners, the worst was still ahead, because surviving the fight meant entering a different kind of violence, slower, quieter, and often more deliberate. The battlefield had taken bodies. What followed would take lives in other ways. After the battlefield fell silent, reality set in slowly. There was no clear moment when a medieval battle truly ended. Violence faded unevenly. In one corner, men lay dying. In another, survivors argued over loot. Somewhere else, prisoners waited, bound and terrified, unsure whether the worst had passed or was about to begin. For many, survival felt unreal. Adrenaline drained from bodies, leaving weakness and shock. Hands trembled. Vision narrowed. Some men collapsed where they stood, not wounded, simply emptied. Others wandered aimlessly, unable to remember orders or faces. The mind struggled to process what the body had endured. Medieval society had no language for trauma, only silence. The wounded were rarely treated. Medical knowledge was limited, and priorities were brutal. Commanders focused on securing territory, regrouping forces, and preparing for what came next. A wounded common soldier was expendable. If he survived, it was by chance. If not, he was one less mouth to feed. Those who could walk were forced to move. Those who could not were often left behind. This is where death continued quietly. Injuries that might be survivable today became fatal within days. Infection set in quickly. Dirt, blood, and fragments of armor filled wounds. Fever followed. Many died alone, far from home, unseen and unrecorded. And then there were the prisoners. Captured soldiers were gathered after order returned, when killing slowed enough to allow restraint. They were bound, searched, stripped of valuables, and counted only roughly. No names, no identities, just bodies under control. Prisoners were not protected by law. Their fate depended entirely on circumstance. The nature of the war, the resources of the victor, the temperament of officers, and the speed at which the army needed to move. Mercy was never guaranteed. Some prisoners were killed soon after capture, not out of rage, but practicality. Guards required manpower. Food was scarce. Time mattered. If prisoners slowed the army or threatened security, they were eliminated quietly. A blade in the dark, a body left beyond the camp. No witnesses, no records. Others were spared temporarily. Those deemed valuable were separated. Nobles, knights, men of status. They were treated differently, not as people, but as investments. Their survival was protected only as long as profit remained possible. Common soldiers rarely received this consideration. Most prisoners entered a second ordeal. They were marched away from the battlefield, often in chains, weak from hunger and wounds. These marches killed almost as many as the fighting itself. Anyone who fell behind risked being beaten or killed to maintain pace. The road erased the weak. For those who survived, captivity stretched endlessly ahead. Labor, ransom, sale, forced service, or slow disappearance behind walls and fences. Survival meant usefulness. Uselessness meant death. Even those released were not free. Former prisoners returned home changed, often broken. Injuries limited work. Fear lingered. Nightmares followed. Communities expected silence. There was no honor in capture, no reward for endurance. Many never spoke of what they had seen. Medieval battles did not produce heroes for most who fought in them. They produced survivors, and survivors carried invisible damage. Families absorbed it quietly. Villages learned to live with absence. The land itself remembered. Battlefields remained scarred for years. Bones surfaced after rain. Rusted weapons emerged from soil. Fields refused to grow properly where blood had soaked deep. Local people avoided these places, sensing something wrong long after memory faded. History remembered victories. It remembered kings, banners, and dates. It did not remember the men who suffocated beneath bodies, who bled out in mud, who vanished into captivity, or who returned unable to live as they had before. Those stories were never written. This is why medieval battles appear distant and abstract today. We see them through paintings, legends, and clean timelines. But the reality was immediate, personal, and horrifying. A medieval battle was not a moment of glory. It was an environment of fear, confusion, and irreversible loss. It destroyed bodies, fractured minds, and reshaped communities long after swords were lowered. And the most important truth is this: most who fought did not fight for honor. They fought because they had no choice. Most who died did not die quickly. They died frightened, exhausted, and unseen. What medieval battles really looked like was not heroic. They looked like chaos. They sounded like screaming. They smelled like blood and smoke. And for those who survived, they never truly ended. Because the battlefield did not stop at the edge of the field. It followed them home.